Tides from the West, a Chinese autobiography. Written by Chiang Meng Lin, read by Tang Da-Ming.
Chapter 31. At the terminal city of the Burma Road. With the migration of the universities, I came to stay for the duration of the war at Kunming, terminal city on the Burma Road. Before Pearl Harbor, I made one visit to Myanmar and many to Indochina and Hong Kong. All were connected with Kunming by air. After the capitulation of France, Indochina was given over to Japan virtually without a fight. So we built the Burma Road to connect the city with Yangon. After Pearl Harbor, Myanmar too was lost to the enemy. Land communications with Haiphong in Indochina and Yangon in Myanmar were cut. Kunming was now bottled up. Land-lease ammunition ceased to flow into the city except by air over the hump of the Himalayas, which separates China from the land of Buddha. In the last few years, I have visited Chongqing by air many times, and once also Chengdu, capital of Sichuan province. The hilly, wartime national capital of China is situated on the banks of the Yangtze River within the Yangtze Gorges. The city is built on hills. Its narrow strip of land is girdled by the Yangtze on the south and the Jialing River on the north, the two rivers merging into the greater Yangtze at the easternmost point of the narrow strip. Thus Chongqing looks like a tiny peninsula. Most of the houses are built upon terraces, and dugouts were made at their back doors or under the buildings through the granite hills. For several years, Japanese planes rained explosives on the defenseless city, day after day, night after night, month after month. But the capital remained undaunted. Buildings were hit and destroyed and rebuilt by tens of thousands, yet comparatively few lives were lost. The enemy tried to bomb the wartime government out of its capital, but the city still stands like the pyramids, which have endured their many centuries of hardship and will stand many centuries more. Chongqing embodies to perfection the spirit of stubborn resistance against the Japanese invaders. To the west of the hilly capital, about half an hour distant by air, is the flat city of Chengdu. This walled city is as spacious as Peking. The streets are wide. The atmosphere is also somewhat like that of the former capital. The irrigation system at Guanxian, established some 20 centuries ago, waters over 1 million acres of fertile land in the Chengdu Valley. Serious flood or drought are almost unknown. This immense, rich valley kept the people in Chongqing and the army stationed in the province and adjacent districts amply fed. When we moved our university to Kunming, we had in mind the possibility of importing books and scientific instruments from Europe and America through Indochina. But after the fall of Guangzhou, the main line for the supply of munitions was cut, and shipments were diverted to the Indochina-Yunnan route. The congestion on the railway precluded the shipment of non-military cargoes. Only a small fraction of our shipments was allowed to trickle in. Meanwhile, all the cities along the Yangtze River fell one after another into the hands of the enemy, up to Yichang, not far from the Yangtze Gorges. Finally, that too failed to stem the tide of advancing enemy might and went under the heel of the invader. Kunming felt the pinch of every adversity of war. What most affected the daily life of the people was the rising cost of living. When we came there in the second year of war, rice per Chinese bushel, or 80 kilograms, cost $6 in Chinese currency. When it had increased by degrees to $40 a bushel, one of our professors of economics predicted that after a few months it would rise to $70. People laughed at him, but it did go to $70. The capitulation of Indochina and the loss of Myanmar both severely affected the price of commodities. The first noticeable rise in prices came after the first bombing of the city by enemy planes. The country people were afraid to come in, and fewer vegetables and meats were brought to market. The shopkeepers worried over the safety of their goods and raised prices to cover their possible loss. The embargo on certain imported goods also affected the prices of similar or allied home products. Thus, the embargo on kerosene raised the prices of vegetable oils. The rise in price of vegetable oils carried with it an increasing price for lard. When lard went up, pork followed suit. One thing thus led to another. The upward run of prices naturally gave rise to a host of hoarders. Hoarding, in turn, aggravated the price situation. When the swing of the pendulum went higher on one side, momentum brought it high again on the other. The thing to have done, of course, was to control prices by controlling commodities from the very beginning of the war, not try to regulate prices after it was too late. I was told by a British friend that British farmers made a good deal of profit out of the First World War, but that farm products were controlled at the beginning of this war. Since this was the first modern war on a large scale in China, she had no past experience of such problems. The climate of Kunming is really ideal. Situated in the semi-tropical zone at an altitude of 6,000 feet, the city is something like a great summer resort. But because of its size, the inhabitants do not think of it as such. It is perpetual spring. The rainy season falls in summer, when frequent showers cool off the summer days. During the other seasons, most of the days are filled with smiling sunshine cast upon the luxuriant growth in the fields from a cloudless blue sky. Flowers abound in that climate, and fruits are plentiful. Melons, eggplant, and citrons grow to enormous sizes. People do not have to work hard to make a living. They enjoy a complacent life and take things in leisurely fashion. Newcomers from the coastal provinces were at first exasperated by the slowness of the inhabitants, but they themselves gradually melted into that sea of tranquility. The people of Kunming were quite concerned about the flow of thousands of refugees into the city from the coast. Many brought large sums of money and spent it freely. The local people blamed them for the increasing cost of living. The city was crowded with fashionable young ladies and well-dressed folk from the coast. In the evenings, they rubbed shoulders with native citizens on the sidewalks of the main streets of Kunming. House rents rose fast. Hotels were all filled to capacity. On arrival, people often found no place to stay. New houses shot up like mushrooms. Old houses destroyed by bombs were rapidly restored. Yet, the population grew faster than houses could be built to accommodate it. Within the few years of the war, Kunming was transformed. The old tranquil scene was filled with truck drivers, war profiteers, contractors, engineers, and manufacturers. Munitions trucks shuttled through the outskirts of the city. The natural and historical surroundings, however, remained unchanged. Kunming Lake, which flows into the Yangtze and over 2,000 miles into the East China Sea, remained as placid as before. Fish and duck enjoyed their watery life as in days of old. Historic temples with quaint trees around them perched on the hills overlooking the wide span of the rippling lake. The Buddhist monks chanted their prayers as others have done centuries ago. Looking over the lake to the horizon, I often wondered, if a sealed bottle with letters in it were thrown into the water, might it not be carried by the outgoing current down the Yangtze, passing through Chongqing, Yichang, Hankou, Zhoujiang, Anqing, and Nanjing to the sea near Shanghai? And perhaps some fisherman might pick it up and forward it to my native land of Zhejiang. It was, of course, only the dream of an exile thinking of home. A network of aqueducts built between two parallel embankments protected by age-old spruces conducts water to irrigate tens of thousands of acres of fertile land. The embankments are wide enough to run a horse on. One could trot leisurely along this endless trail for miles in the forest of scent-laden spruce, traversing the luxuriant fields. In the city, a stone tablet marking the spot where the last refugee emperor of the Mings was strangled to death looks tragically down the slope at the passers-by. The much-to-be-pitied emperor fled to Myanmar, but was taken back to China by General Wu Sangui, the one who later, while defending the Great Wall against the ethnic Manchus, was to go over to the enemy in order to save his lady from the bandit leader. In his campaign against his own people in South China, he came to Yunnan, where the captive emperor was brought before him. "What do you have to say?" asked the general as the story has it. "Nothing," replied the last emperor of the Mings. "The only thing I wanted to know is, why did you rebel against my forefathers, from whom you received so much favor and so many honors?" Wu Sangui trembled at these words and ordered the captive emperor strangled at the spot where the stone tablet now stands. It reads, "Here died Emperor Yongli of the Ming Dynasty for his country." About 10 kilometers from the city is the Black Dragon Pool. Spring water, crystal clear, oozes out from the bottom and overflows into tiny streams. Around it are temples and gigantic moss-grown trees. A scholar and his family lived here toward the end of the Ming Dynasty. When news of the emperor's death and the consequent downfall of the dynasty reached him, he plunged into the pool and committed suicide. His family and servants followed suit. The whole family died for their country by suicide and were all buried there. This is difficult for the Western mind to understand, but Chinese philosophy holds that if you cannot do anything else to save your country, death is the only way to redeem the debt of your conscience. By this philosophy, the Chinese soldiers laid down their lives during this war, willingly, by hundreds of thousands in a battle, often of simple flesh and blood, against the enemy's steel and fire. Our more or less chronological story is here ended for the time being. The following chapters will discuss some of the problems of Chinese civilization and culture, past, present, and future, and some of the persistent national problems that will present themselves in China in years to come. From Hong Kong in 1842 to Pearl Harbor in 1941 is a period of exactly 1 century. To tell the story of that period, this volume has been written. England was instrumental in blasting China's southern gates open to world commerce. With the flow of opium and Western manufactures came the seeds of Western thought and science, which affected China's view toward life and the universe. She resisted, struggled, and finally absorbed Western culture, as she did Indian culture centuries and centuries before. England was the instrument of fate that brought China into the community of the world. The course China took was rather roundabout, like the winding of the Yangtze River. But in direction, she remained unchanged, like the Yangtze, which moves down over its course of more than 2,000 miles to color the Yellow Sea, in spite of its many windings. It flows day and night, month after month, year after year, and will flow in the same way for endless centuries to come. The invincible Yangtze is the symbol of China's national life and culture.
What you just heard is Tides from the West, a Chinese autobiography, Written by Chiang Meng-lin, read by Tang Da-min, and published by the Foreign Language Teaching and Research Press. Some names and terminologies in this book have been updated per contemporary usages.